welcome back to another exciting episode of Healing for the Soul podcast. I am your host, Robin Stoltman, where every week I feature different guests to help you become the better version of yourself through different methods you may not have heard of or even thought of. Today I have my guest Jan on the show talking about the J.O.Y Method. So let's get started. Thank you, Jan, for being here. I really appreciate your time and your energy and being here. So
Thank you. I'm so excited.
What is your specialty and who do you like to work with?
Wow, jumping right in. Well, my specialty is joy, like authentic joy, the kind of joy that no matter what's going on outside of you, you can feel it from within. And then you actually get to kind of shift the experience outside of you. So really my specialty, my jam, as I like to say, is essentially cultivating joy on your terms. And in fact, joy is an acronym that I utilize of just own you, and understanding that each one of us will have a unique definition for joy and for happiness. And I know we're going to get into that very, very soon, the difference between joy and happiness. And yet who we are today and who we will be tomorrow and what brings us joy a year from now or a decade from now or more will be evolving, because we are evolving beings, growing and transforming as different things happen in our life and we create different things in our life. So I'm really about authentic joy that is from a personal expression. And who I love to work with, especially, are leaders, individuals that see themselves as visionary. They have something more, and they know that they're here to impact more individuals. Now, realizing that, a beautiful housewife or a house dad can be a leader. I mean, it's not like there is no defined job title to leader, but it's the people who raise their hands and say, you know what, I know that I'm here to impact and influence more than just my own life. And I want to know how to do that from my highest expression, which, joy is almost to enlightenment. So it is a very high level of consciousness and way of being and showing up in this life.
That is awesome. Because I like how you have for the J.O.Y Method itself, it says just
own you.
Just own you. That's awesome.
Yeah. And, it's very distinctive for a reason. Look, obviously I have big energy, happy, bright energy. I have rainbows. Literally, I'm backed by rainbows. And yet, look, happiness and joy, it's not always bouncing off the wall happy. I mean, just owning you is also about owning when you're not in your joy, when you're in a lower state of consciousness, when you're feeling the stuff because things aren't going the way you want them to. And recognizing that that's part of the human spectrum. That's part of the, full life experience. And if we don't allow ourselves to feel the darkness, we won't ever fully know the light. Just like the stars at night, like, the stars are always shining, but we only see them when the contrast comes at night. And so just owning you is about acknowledging that sometimes you're on your way to more joy and you're not fully in, your highest level of joy.
That makes sense. I like that. So then what's the best way for our audience to contact you with your time zone?
Well, I am in the mountain time zone. I live in the mountains. I have elk and moose and bear outside my window. We might even have my dog barking at them at any point. But yes, I live in the mountain time zone in Teton Mountains of Wyoming.
Oh, that's awesome. I heard it's really beautiful out there. I've never been there, but I've seen pictures of Wyoming area, and I'm like, it looks beautiful, but I'm sure in person it's more breathtaking than just the pictures. I'm still amazed we have all this technology, but yet there is nothing compared to the human eye and the human experience of actually being there in that moment and far in front of the mountains. It's just amazing.
Well, and in all of life, really. But yes, you'll
Mhm.
have to come on out. Come on, play. Yeah.
I'll have to. That'd be fun.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, even to your point, talking about being in person, like I'm so thankful we have platforms like this to connect
Oh,
and
yes.
converse upon and, spread soulful messaging and uplifting messages and everything else and energy, because we can feel energy even through this, but there really is nothing like in person. Like that's where a lot of my work is done in person. I'm about to host an embodied joy retreat, actually, an embodied joy adventure experience in the Florida Keys actually next month. But
Oh,
I'm
that's
all
exciting.
about experiencing as much as possible in person, but I'm so thankful for virtual platforms. I actually collaborate with Jackson Hole Mountain Resorts to do a mindful ski camp, which is really cool because I bring my work to the experience of skiing and sliding down the snow for skiers that want to get more and get into the joy of skiing.
That's
But
awesome.
this life isn't about sitting around and talking. It's about getting in it.
It is, which is good. So then, what is your joy method and how does that work?
Well, essentially, the J.O.Y method is starting with this idea of just owning you and appreciating that it's a personal experience. The definition for you will evolve. What I know that I'm here to teach and guide is essentially returning you back to you. And part of the J.O.Y method includes a process and a framework that I developed out of my own challenging circumstances. At the time, it was major depression. We also had a cancer scare with my son, and then also experienced, and he was 6 weeks at the time, by the way, and then also experienced a family tragedy where we dramatically lost my mother-in-law in a car accident. So um, I created a process called the Happiness Prism out of this experience. It's essentially the idea of the fact that we are all beings of light, and when we are optimized, we get to radiate and shine our rainbows out in the world and have maximum impact and influence while also having the maximum experience for ourselves. And so the Happiness Prism arrived from these different circumstances that happened at different times, just to be clear, of my life. But when I went back and realized what shifted for me in every one of those situations were three different energies and elemental energies of play, peace, and progress. And what I found is when we honor each one of these energies, these elements on a daily basis and on really an ongoing basis, that's what has us optimize. That's also what has us bounce back and forward to be more resilient. I know that's a beautiful aspect of your work, and finding resiliency, because life is going to happen for us all the time.
Yes.
There's all these learning opportunities. But when we don't have the tools to be empowered to relate to the challenges, like some of the ones I've shared, and I have many more behind that, and challenges that my clients have been through, that when we don't necessarily have the tools, we're not able to bounce back and bounce forward from there to let that setback actually become a set up. And so
That's an interesting way. I'm just like think about letting it not become a setback, but a set up. I like
mhm,
that.
yeah, because I mean, as you know in your work, like
Mhm.
when you experience a challenge, it's who you get to grow into as a result. It's taking the lessons and not just letting it take you down. Now, we're all
Yeah.
human. I'm human. I let it take me down sometimes, but I don't let myself stay down there, because I know how fast
Yeah.
I can bounce back and, let that be a setup for so much more in my life. And, anyone listening, recognizing that, hey, this life really does get to be beautiful and magical and wonderful. And, even in the most challenging of circumstances. I mean, if that's okay, I'd love to share a story
Oh, yeah,
of
that'd be
a
good.
particular time. I'll share about actually the cancer scare with my then 6-week-old son. And I'm using this as an example for anyone listening. And I just invite you to tune in and feel into your own challenging circumstances, because we've all had them. Like we all
Yeah.
have some version of what I'm about to share. It may not be the
True.
same details and everything else and the same severity, or it might be, even more drastic. But what I'm about to share is a situation where it was a very dark hour. I had just been changing my son's onesie. He had this weird thing in his arm and it just didn't make sense, and called the doctor, kind of no big deal. And they said, oh, we need to take films. And well, the next thing I know, about 8 hours later, I am in a children's hospital cancer hospital room.
Wow.
We were in the cancer wing of the children's hospital. At the time, we were living about 2 hours away, and my husband's home with my 2-year-old because they can't stay at the hospital with us. I'm a breastfeeding mom. And it was such a devastating moment of like, oh my gosh, like 8 hours ago, 10 hours ago, we were just a happy family going about our day. And then here we are with this possibility of, a life-threatening condition that's possibly cancer. We don't know. And I just remember that first night that I was just so devastated. And kind of a backstory even to then, that was the first time up until then I had been coaching for quite a while, but life coaching, and just really focusing on, shift your thoughts, personal growth, focus on what the outcome that you want. But this was the first time that I realized I couldn't just think my way out of the situation. And in my devastation, it's the first time I really leaned back and looked up and asked for help. And so I will openly say this is like my spiritual awakening. And it was when my coaching took a drastic pivot from life coaching to spiritual life coaching. Now, I didn't have like an epiphany that first night, but I went to bed, woke up, of course, like, oh my gosh, I'm in this nightmare. And realizing this is so devastating. I don't know how to get out of this, but I'm not going to let his story end this way. I'm not going to let my story end as his mother this way. I just don't know how. So through my devastation, I realized I need to eat. And so I'm in a children's hospital, and through my tears, I open up the menu and I look down, and through my tears, I start to laugh, and I realize I can order Fruit Loops. And just the thought, the audacity, I can order Fruit Loops. They are so colorful and rainbow and fun. And at first I'm like, I can't order Fruit Loops. That's not healthy for my body or his body. And then this larger voice came over me, like that larger part of me that I awakened to the previous night, right?
Yeah.
Said, oh, Jan, you don't need nourishment for your body. You need it for your soul. And you're going to order the Fruit Loops. So guess what? I ordered the Fruit Loops. And for those few minutes, I enjoyed the Fruit Loops. Right? Like my son's over there, like he was chirping and happy. I got to say, he was beautiful. And I'm eating Fruit Loops. And just for this split moment in this nightmare moment of my life, I'm in joy. And I let that be such a gorgeous experience for myself. And then, the Fruit Loops went away, and like, I honestly don't really eat Fruit Loops anymore, but it didn't matter. It wasn't about that nourishment. It was the soul nourishment that I allowed myself to get into a state of joy. And then from there, so essentially that was play for me that day. And then from
that sounds
there,
like it.
Right? From there, I moved into what I call peace, which I've shared briefly, of the Happiness Prism, in which I describe peace as prayer in motion. And this isn't religious. This is spiritual. This is just tuning into that larger part. And I would drop into quiet space and say, okay, my intention is to really get out of here. Please guide me as to what this looks like. And, be in the space and let myself also process the, angst and fear that I had. So I let myself be in peace. And then from there, I honored the aspect of the Happiness Prism of progress, which I define as purpose in motion. And
I like that.
What I was able to do, and where this Fruit Loop moment led me, was to be in a higher state of consciousness, so that when I moved into my intention of, we're going to get out of here, don't know how, we're going to get out of here, and then moved into what actions do I need to take, which are have the tough conversation with the doctors, make the tough decisions. This kid needs a blood transfusion. I just gave him birth 6 weeks ago and I want someone else's blood in him. A lower thought consciousness would have been no way. But I was in my joy, and it was like, you know what? This is the next step. I need to honor what he needs. And he needed a blood transfusion. So we did it. But what all this to say is, you don't have to necessarily be in a devastating circumstance, but you can be and still turn the light on to what else gets to be possible. And that's where, my J.O.Y method and this idea of the happiness prism and this idea of, as I call the Fruit Loop moment, is so powerful and wonderful, and a gift to everyone to realize you can find little joys throughout your day, no matter what you might be facing. I mean, I don't know how many times, maybe you can already think of some, where there's like these freak laughter moments when things are completely falling apart. Like,
Yep.
like, I don't know
Recently, yes.
Yeah. And it's like, you kind of get to the point where you're like, really? Like, could this just get any more crummy? Like, really? And then you just have to like laugh and cry and just be with it. But that's the beauty and realization that, I wholeheartedly believe, and I believe you do too. This is meant to be a beautiful life. And yeah, there's going to be ugly, but it still gets to be beautiful. You still get to have joyful moments. And I do believe each one of us innately have a joyful state inside of us, but we weren't necessarily grown up and taught how to allow that joy through. I mean, if you look at children on the playground, they organically know joy. And then all of a sudden that window starts to close unless we consciously create the opportunities to keep that muscle going. And that's what I do with my J.O.Y method, is I really serve my leaders in understanding how to continue to cultivate that muscle, because it's just like any muscle. If you don't use it, it goes away.
True.
And we all, a lot of us, most of us probably know this idea of you play when the work is done. Well, I actually teach you play first, or you play with the work, or both. Like, you play while you work. It's not either or, it's an and. So that's kind of the fundamentals of the J.O.Y method that I teach. And yet I know you're going to want to ask me about the difference between happiness and joy, and I'm happy to get into that.
Yes. What's the difference between the happiness and the joy?
Yeah. Well, there's essentially, it's kind of a long answer, but I'll give you the most succinct possible. So I've always connected with the word happy. And part of my, backstory is I had depression. And at the time I was taking happy pills and I hated them. And a lot of people and a lot of understanding of the notion of happiness in the world is it's something outside of us. I had to take a happy pill to help me be happy, right? So a lot of the common conversation around happiness is about something outside of us. And, at the time I was starting to develop my Happiness Prism process, I was really connected with the word happiness because I believe it is something we all deserve, and yet it's not something we all know how to achieve, right?
Or accept
all of these things, right? All of the things. Well, what was interesting is as I've been moving about my life journey and I was sharing about my Happiness Prism with different people, I would see that the Happiness Prism concept would land with some people and it would not land with others, because for some, happiness is outside of you. And for others, joy landed more. And that's when I started to attune to the word joy. And then I started to identify with this acronym of Just Owning You. And then as I've continued on my journey to realize, depending upon who you're speaking with, the notion of happiness and the notion of joy can actually be the same. Because there are some folks out there. I mean, I've been on a lot of happiness focused podcasts, for example, and they're all pointing to joy the way I teach it. They're all pointing to that experience.
So that makes sense.
They're all pointing to that experience within ourselves. But what I like to say fundamentally is that, author, speaker, thought leader, Eckhart Tolle talks about words as a signpost to something more. And so as I like to, invite everyone and encourage everyone, that I do come into a space of, we're pointing at that experience inside that we do all crave. And if it's joy that identifies and connects for you, if it's happiness that identifies and connects for you, it's an understanding of it's that experience inside that we know can't come from the outside. And so
True.
I've actually now come to a space of appreciation that I talk about joy, but there's people out there talking about happiness from the same space. But not everybody can understand that those can be interchangeable. It's just a matter of sitting with it and really looking at where are you coming from with that experience. Are you looking to go achieve that thing or do that thing or have that thing because you think that that experience you want is going to be outside of you? Or are you realizing, and this is what I teach, is that joy is not just the destination, it's also the vehicle to the destination. And it's the
I like
vehicle
that.
to arrive at the destination with way more satisfaction. So, interestingly enough, I don't know if you've tuned into any of the Dalai Lama's conversation around joy.
I haven't. No, I
He
need to
wrote,
though.
yeah, it's, he actually he wrote a really beautiful book and then did a beautiful, there's a documentary between he and our Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and they talk about joy. But what's really beautiful, if you tune in closely, they initially talk about happiness being outside of you, but then they also eventually start talking about joy and happiness interchangeably. So it's really getting to a place of distinction and appreciation that whether you're talking about joy or happiness, it's looking at what is it inside of you that's going to assist in cultivating that experience. And that's where ultimately my work, my mission in this world is about serving leaders, especially to discover that. So my works, especially through the Happiness Prism framework, is about returning you to you and discovering who you are today versus tomorrow inside of that joy factor, inside of that joy and or happiness that you are craving as your soul.
I like that. In case you were wondering why I was looking down off and I'm like, I had to take notes for me. I'm like, I like that. Because I like that just own you. And then it is about the play, the peace, and the progress. I like that.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah,
ultimately, yeah, that's what it is that we all need in life.
it is. And that's where, as I teach it, so play is joy in motion. And it's no other agenda other than being in your joy. And realizing that when we lead with play, that we ultimately find ourselves in a better state of mind and a better space of receptivity for the other messages that need to come through, the intuition, the creativity, whatever is next. And so many of us try to jump to progress in this world, and that's what we're kind of taught. But when you actually take the time to play and then pause in the piece and then take the action and progress, that is when you are way more satisfied and way more productive, way more efficient, effective, impactful, healthier, wealthier, all the things. So it really is like having a competitive advantage in this life, because a lot of people are not operating this way.
No, I would agree with you. I think it's actually reminded me back. I still sell Discovery Toys. It's a network marketing company, and they have educational books, games, and that. And I loved the different toys. And like every time, so that was like what I did before I started my Healing for the Soul business. Well, when I did the Discovery Toys, I'm like, I loved going to the vendor shows. I loved going and helping people at these different shows because I would see the kids light up. And then, of course, you walk around, these parents are like, oh, well, I don't want that. I don't, my kids don't play with toys and all that. And I'm like, but I kept thinking, like, but that's why you're stressed. Like, even the adults, I'm like, there's products for adults too in the line. But it's like, that's why adults have high blood pressure. That's why they've got high cholesterol. That's why they have so much stress, this incredible amount, because they work, and then they get to the end of their life, and then they expect retirement, which I'm like, I never understood retirement because over half the people I know that retire go back and work again. And it's like, but then you end up on your deathbed and you're like, nobody on their deathbed sit there and says, I wish I would have worked more. I wish I would have put more time in at the office. The deathbed regrets are always about things that they never got to do, the things that they wish they would have done, or, it's like the more time with family, more of this and that. And it's like, if we could teach people this now, that's the part that I'm like, yeah. Because, I agree that I really like that. Like, even with my own kids, it's like, so before I had kids, my husband, he thought I was weird because I'm like, I would go to the park and play. This before we had kids. And I'm like, well, why can't I go to the park and play? I like the slides. I like the swing. Why can't I go do it? And he says, well, because that's for little kids. And I'm like, but nobody said that there's a rule. I've never seen a park with an age limit. So I'm like, why not? So then when he did it, he's like, okay, this isn't so bad. I'm like, I told you.
I love that. We're all just little kids walking around in adult bodies anyway. Let's just be honest.
Well, I know that's what I keep telling people. I'm like, why do you think there's healing the inner child, which is extremely powerful with hypnosis? Right. And it's like, why do you think we've got these different issues? It's because if we don't heal from them as a child, that's why it continues into adulthood. And it'll never stop until you actually deal with the issue. I'm enjoying this conversation a lot. I like this joy method that you have, and about the play and the play, peace, and progress. My notes. I like this.
Well, and you hit the nail on the head about the no regrets. And that's where like the basis of, what my mission is really, helping these leaders build a no regrets life. Because actually the story of my mother-in-law tragically leaving this world, she had just gone into retirement. They waited to do all these cool things, and then her life was over. And that actually was the catalyst to me starting my business. At that point, I knew I wanted to coach and support people in this way and really serve them and, in healing and identifying what has them in their joy and get to experience all the things they have created and create more, right? But and go play on a slide if that's part of it. Like, I love that about you. But anyway, like, that's where this whole idea of the no regrets life as my mission comes from. And I love that you said that, because it really is like, no one gets to their deathbed and said, I wished I worked more. They all say in some capacity is, I wish I enjoyed more, enjoyed the relationships, enjoyed the experiences, enjoyed the little things in between. And that's what is so powerful and important, that, people, again, weren't always taught how. And, if they need the healing to heal the inner child, like, come see you. If they want to cultivate daily habits and build out bigger visions with joy, come see me. Like,
that's what it's all about, is
pass this by.
Yeah. And it's finding that avenue that works. So that's why I'm like, I like your method a lot, because I'm like, I can definitely, like, even myself, I'm like, I think I can use this myself, to help between like everything, because it does get stressful and overwhelming as a leader, not just like at home, but, like as an entrepreneur, it gets very stressful.
Yeah, it can be very, very fascinating. And that's, so much I talk about is like a joy-led life is the path less traveled. You're blazing your own trail. When you really honor your joy in the highest, no one else has done what you've done in the way that you are meant to do it. So of course it's going to be wild and hairy and crazy and scary. And yet that's also where the biggest rewards are, right?
It is.
When you let yourself go and experience the extraordinary, the less ordinary, the extraordinary. And that's where I know we're about out of time, but I have story after story personally and from clients where it was like, it wasn't what was going to happen. And then the most unexpected thing happened. Like, a long story, very short. I mean, I met my husband in Australia on the first day as a ski instructor at ski school.
Oh, that's awesome.
I would never have guessed that my life trajectory meant that I graduated college, turned down a corporate job, followed my passion and joy for skiing to Aspen, Colorado, where I met Australian colleagues, went to Australia, and then I met my now husband, who I've been with for almost 20 years now. So,
That's awesome.
but if I hadn't honored that path less traveled, if I had honored the traditional path, go to college, go to the corporate job, all these things, I mean, all the time, my husband and I are like, when would we have met? How would we have like
You
met?
would have.
Like,
That's the thing.
how would our paths have crossed? And then like the circumstances he had to follow to show up at ski school, he was in a, career path that he like needed a break from. It was just like, talk about the trajectory that your life gets to take when you start to wake up and take the hairy, scary, path that is like, am I crazy? But this is where I'm going to lean in and say to anyone listening, you're crazy not to, because that's when you do get to the life at the end and say, I'm regretting that I didn't pursue that opportunity. Like there's a lot that didn't turn out for me, but so much more did. And now I have a beautiful family. And by the way, my son is now 9 years old and he's thriving like all heck. And, my kids are skiers, and like all cool things get to unfold when you honor that really higher, bigger truth and bigger yes inside, that true soul, that true joy.
I love that. I love that a lot. I think this is another episode that I can come back and watch myself. I already took some notes, so I'm like, we can take and do some more. I like that a lot.
Love it. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Jan. I really appreciate your time and your energy, especially with our audience and everything, all the different tips and everything, especially your story about your son. It
Thank
really
you.
puts a different perspective on life, or all of us as a whole. So I really enjoy your stories and about the J.O.Y Method. And I look forward to being able to hear more about it too. So what's the best way for the audience to get a hold of you one more time?
Yeah, really the best way is probably via my website. It's janhoath.com. That's JANHOATH.com. And they can check out opportunities for us to connect. I have a video series that they can tune into as my compliments, or other ways for us to play together. But that really is the best way for us to connect to initially.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thank you for letting me bring my joy to your world, and just so much love to you and all that you are doing, Robin. I really appreciate you. And I just really encourage everyone listening to look for your Fruit Loop moments today. And I promise you, your life will already feel a little bit better, and you'll feel brighter and be even a little bit more joyful, if not a lot.
Well, thank you. Bye.
Bye.